Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. Time for a bit of a movie review, a retro movie review. We're going to talk about Citizen Kane. And I say we because I would love to know what you think about Citizen Kane, the classic and famous movie by Orson Welles. So leave me some comments. Let me know just what you think about Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane is a movie that you ought to watch, and there's a few reasons why I think you should watch it. The first one is it is a foundational work of cinema. It's part of our cultural experience. It's been referenced numerous times since its creation. It continues to be referenced today, not just humorous references, but also allusions in more serious works of art. Lots of things are built on Citizen Kane and take it for granted that you know what Citizen Kane is and are going to be able to understand things that are related to it. Kind of like understanding Shakespeare. This is an important movie, and for that reason, you should watch it. But I also happen to think it's a damn good movie, and I think it's worth watching just on its own, for its own merits and for what it does. I think it holds up well. I watched it recently on a flight, and boy, it really pleased me. It was really, really a good movie to go back and watch again. So I think it holds up in 2026, but I think it's even better for that third reason. You put it in the historical context of when and where it was made and how it was made, and I think it becomes all that much better. If you compare it to lots of movies that were made around the time of Citizen Kane, around the 1940s, I think you'll find that it really is a sparkling example of what's possible to do with cinema as an art form. Citizen Kane is a really good example of auteur art. And so when we're talking about foundational works, when we're talking about touchstones, cultural touchstones, this is an important one because it's made basically by one guy, Orson Welles. He has a co-writer. Obviously, he has a small cast of actors that work with him, but he's playing the lead. He's directing it. He's really making a movie according to his own artistic desires, his own artistic ego, and the result is something that is really, really good. Now, the thing about Citizen Kane is that, kind of like a lot of other movies that we consider just bona fide classics, absolute titans of the cinema, it was not a big box office success. It was actually prevented from opening in a lot of theaters, and in some ways really torpedoed Orson Welles' career. It's an example of an independent movie, and as well as an auteur movie. And so when people are looking at cinema as an art form, Citizen Kane is going to be part of those essential works that you should know and that you should look at and you can reference and think about as what's possible to do in cinema independently with an auteur's vision, an artist's true vision, being able to look at what's possible to do with movies and make something that's really special in the medium of film, of motion pictures. So historically, I think it's really important. If you look at a lot of other movies made around this time in the 1940s, some of the complaints that might pop up if you are looking at this through a modern lens are also going to apply to a lot of those other movies in the 1940s. And so the first big one is probably the acting. Okay, those of us who are really used to modern movies that are made post 1970 in particular, are going to be really familiar with method acting and an approach to acting on the screen that assumes close-ups, that's more reserved, that's in many ways has a more intimate feeling because the camera, they use a lot more close approaches of the camera now compared to, say, the 1940s. The 1940s, you have the film industry still evolving out of the theatrical industry. So there's a lot of shared cultural ground and shared practices that are still present in the 1940s that slowly start to get kind of whittled away until you end up with a film-centric approach to acting that occurs later. So if you look at Citizen Kane or any other movies from the 1940s, including like Casablanca, you're going to find that the actors, maybe by today's standards, would be overacting, right? Or they'd be melodramatic. They'd be moving too much. They'd be speaking too quickly, speaking too loudly. Their gestures would be exaggerated. And this comes from the theater tradition. And you also have to think about what films actually looked like to people back then, is that the screens were not as big. People were sitting further away. The image quality is not as high. And in general, everything needed to be a little bit more clear. The audio recording equipment back then was not as good as it is today. You don't have as many options post-production to clean up your audio. There's just a lot more that goes into the production of a movie that can limit it. You're limited by the technology of the 1940s. And to me, that's not really a bad thing. That's just putting it in its historical context. And it's the same thing with the music. The music score is an okay score. It's not, to me, a brilliant score. I think people are really used to highly thematic, highly operatic sorts of scores, very programmatic scores that are very influenced by programmatic romantic and post-romantic music like Gustav Holst. So I'm thinking especially of, for example, like James Horner, of course, John Williams, right? Something that is very singable. This is not what we get with this sort of score. What we have is a mid-century film score. A lot of other films are going to have similar approaches to score. This score is really there to support and emphasize the mood of the movie, first and foremost. It's not a thing that's designed to be put in your CD player. They didn't have CD players back then, or put on your record player and just listen to on its own. Rather, it's part of the whole. And to me, that makes for a pretty good score. It's very effective. It does what it needs to do, and doesn't insert itself into any scene, and instead it's there to support the real emphasis of the movie, which is the characters and the acting. Especially Orson Welles. Orson Welles really does command the screen when you see him on the screen, and that's another reason why I think you should watch it, is that he's a fabulous actor. And if you watch Orson Welles really in any film role he's done, including Transformers, which was the last thing he did, was voiceover work for Transformers. I think he was Omicron. He was a giant robot. He does a really fantastic job. He has a great command of his voice, but he also is able to command his face. He's able to command the physicality of the space that we see in the film, and really is the star of the show in so many different ways. So it's really worth watching just for him. There's a lot of great things about this movie besides the focus on the character, and of course the writing. It's an incredibly well-written movie. There's production elements that I think are really unique, and honestly would probably not be attempted today, and probably wouldn't be attempted simply because we're outside of the monochrome era. Unless you're working in a monochrome space, which some movies do, like Eggers will make movies in black and white, like this movie that I talked about, The Lighthouse, a while back. When you're working in the monochrome space, there's certain film techniques that you can do that you could pull off a lot more easily. And so one of the ones that you see in Citizen Kane is the use of silhouettes, because a silhouette in monochrome or in black and white is black and white. It's really easy to be dramatic with silhouettes. So, for example, there's a scene where all of these journalists are arguing with each other about how they're going to pursue this story of Kane, of Charles Kane. And while they're arguing, you see them all in silhouette. Their faces are completely obscured and hidden. And it has a really great effect because we understand that they are the news. They're a personification of the news. So their face is not seen. The reporter's face is not seen. It's obscure. Instead, it's what they're looking for. It's the subject of Kane that we see on the screen behind them. They're in like a little movie theater. So what we see visually is Kane, but he's not doing anything. It's the silhouettes that are talking. It's the news itself. And the movie's full of techniques like this. Great use of matte paintings, great use of light, great use of blocking, a really great approach to cinematography. So you have just a fantastic use of all the elements that you would want to see in a movie. And they did it in a way that I think is manageable for people today to do a similar movie. It's really inspiring to actually watch Citizen Kane, because you think, okay, well, what you need is a really, really good script, a good story, great actors, and some basic sets, and you can make a movie. You don't need all of the other stuff that we associate with blockbuster movies now to make a good movie. You just have to get down to the essentials of the great story and the great photography. And great photography doesn't have to be really exciting, crazy CGI or really big, giant sets like what you would have with some other, classic Hollywood movies like Cleopatra or something like that. It can be things that are a great moody shot of a giant fireplace, for instance, which is one of the scenes that we have in the movie that shows the characters as these smallish, dwarfed little people next to a giant fireplace. How you choose to construct the scene can have a really big impact in how that movie or how that scene carries emotionally. So lots of great technical stuff in the movie. The themes of the movie, I think, are what really holds people's attention throughout everything. So you have, and I actually, before I get to that, let me mention one other piece of production that I think is really good, is the ability to make the characters age. So Orson Welles is able to look like a young man and a middle-aged man and an old man, and they do this largely not through like prosthetics or anything, but through context, right? What clothes they wear, how they're wearing their hair, whether they have a mustache, how they hold their face, so that Orson Welles really is able to transform from a young, sort of arrogant man into this older Charles Kane. It's a really, really well done contextual use of makeup and costume in order to produce the effect of aging. And several other characters are able to do that. It's not perfect. It's not flawless. There's points where you see a guy who's just wearing sunglasses and has like white on his mustache and he's supposed to be old, but it works. It does enough. And other characters are really able to pull that off as we go through the movie. So the themes are the things that really matter. This famous Rosebud. The framing of the movie, I just think, is wonderful. What you have is a yellow journalist in the form of Charles Kane. And the movie is framed as journalists attempting to do basically yellow journalism on the man Kane himself, the newsman Kane. That is to say, they're looking for the personal story. They're looking for the salacious angle. They're looking for the exciting story about Kane, not just the facts, but the emotion. And that's the way that he was able to control the news. That was the way he was able to control public opinion, was through emotion, through excitement, through what we call yellow journalism, tabloid journalism. Now, if you're not familiar with Citizen Kane, Charles Kane is sort of an amalgam of several different characters, but the biggest inspiration, the most obvious one, is William Randolph Hearst. If you don't know who William Randolph Hearst was, he owned several newspapers back in the 20th century. He had really lavish parties and giant mansions. He was fabulously wealthy, would buy loads of art from Europe and put it all over his houses. And you can go see the house that is inspiring this movie. In the movie, Kane is in this retreat called Xanadu, right? Decreed by Kublai Khan. You guys can think of all those references to that as well. I can think of so many, but he's in Xanadu. This was inspired by Hearst Castle. Now, if you've never been to Hearst Castle, it's on California's Central Coast. I've been several times. I was just on the Central Coast, but I didn't get a chance to go by and see it. But I think it's a great visit if you're ever in. It's in San Simeon, which is kind of by Cambria. If you think of the Central Coast of California, it would be between, if you were to drive up the coast from like San Luis Obispo all the way to like Santa Cruz, it's sort of in between there. And it's up in the hills. You have to take a bus up to it. He had zoo animals wandering around. He had this giant house plus 2 guest houses, which were enormous. And he lived there with his mistress because he had been estranged from his wife. Well, when the movie came out, he actually pulled a bunch of strings to get theaters to not show the movie. And that actually significantly harmed Orson Welles' career, as I understand it, and harmed the profitability of the Citizen Kane movie. Now, even though time filtering has presented us Citizen Kane as one of these essential pieces of cinema. That was not the case when it was released. And you're still dealing with a business in Hollywood. You have to be able to spend money to make the movie, and you have to make money by having people go watch the movie. And so if the movie's not in theaters, you're not going to be able to make as much money as you need to in order to continue your career, hopefully as an auteur filmmaker. So William Randolph Hearst is the main inspiration here. He was political. You find that Kane is saying many of the similar things that Randolph Hearst said. It's a pretty obvious inspiration, but not one-to-one. It's more like they took the idea of William Randolph Hearst and they made a very human story about it. So the wonderful framing device of the journalist trying to figure out the true story. What's the truth about Charles Foster Kane? What's the truth about him? Okay, who is he really? And they go through all these different interviews. So they interview old men, and then we tend to get flashbacks that kind of fill in that story. So it's a really good framing device that is a journalistic investigation about a man who was all about controlling the news and all about controlling public opinion and doing those sorts of investigations towards, let's say, nefarious ends from time to time. But the deep theme there is actually about what Kane wants. Kane is fabulously wealthy. And towards the end of the movie, you have his second wife really spell it out for him, which is he basically wants to be loved. He wants his wife to love him for the things that he does for her, even though she doesn't really want those things. He didn't really care about what she wanted. He just wanted her to love him. He just wanted to be loved. He wanted someone to think he was special. And he was only attracted to her because originally she didn't know who he was. Through a chance encounter on the street, he's covered with mud. She invites him up to her apartment to get cleaned up with hot water. And he's like, "You really don't know who I am. You don't know that I'm the great newsman, Charles Kane." "No, I don't know who that is." Right. So that's intriguing to him. Somebody would be kind to him and would care about him, not because of anything that he did, right? Not because of his money, not because he owned newspapers or things like that, but because of who he was, right? So he desperately wanted to be loved. And it all comes back to one of the early scenes with oh, where did he come from? Well, his mother inherited this mine, and what does the mother do? She decides that living out in the middle of nowhere is going to be bad for him. She sends him off to Chicago, sends him off to the city. I believe it's Chicago. She sends him off to the city with basically a guardian in the form of a businessman or banker who's going to groom him into being a successful person. So the movie really starts with him having the love of the mother removed, and that creates his whole life, his whole life trajectory. He marries sort of politically to get something that he thinks he wants, which is not really his wife to love him. It's for the people to love him. That's why he's running for governor of New York. It's so that people will love him. It's why he wants to run newspapers and affect the way that people think and feel so that they will care about him. And they will care about the things that he cares about, but they will care about him in particular. And so we go through all these motions. His political career is destroyed because he gets caught having this affair, which of course is an ironic twist because that's what he does. He uses the newspaper to destroy people's lives with yellow journalism, and his political opponent just turns that back around on him, turnabout is fair play. He refuses to back down, and he still has his career destroyed, and he gets his marriage destroyed in the process. And so sort of refusing to have that as a defeat, he marries the mistress. It's not good. She eventually divorces him as well. He loses his first wife and his child. They die in an accident. That happens off screen. They don't show you that. So when they keep talking about, Kane was a guy who had everything and lost everything. Now, did he really lose everything? Well, no, he still had all his wealth, but he lost basically his only friend, which is a kind of one of the B stories there. He had a friend that he hired to do write articles about the arts and stuff. So he loses his best friend, he loses his wife, he loses the people he cares about. And at the end of it, all he has is his money and his wealth, and he doesn't have what he really has. And so he goes back to where he's looking at a snow globe and he says Rosebud. And people are like, who is Rosebud? And the audience finally gets clued into it when at the very end, the steward of the mansion is they're throwing away all the stuff and burning it. And they throw in a sled that says Rosebud on it, and it burns. The sled was the sled from the beginning of the movie when he was a boy. So did he really care about the sled? Well, the sled really represented that pre-money place where he was just a child out playing, living with his parents, his imperfect parents, maybe like the alcoholic father or whatever. But he wanted to go back to that place where he was innocent and loved, not cared about because he owned these possessions. And that's like the great tragedy of Kane's life. It's a really good tragedy. So that's my analysis of that. I think it's a fantastic tragedy. It's a foundational work of Western cinema, one that's everybody should watch, not just because it's referenced so much and you need to have it to kind of gain cultural knowledge, but because I think it's a really good movie and I think you could pick up a lot of things from it. Great cinematography techniques, great acting techniques, excellent writing. And I can't help but feel like when I watch a lot of modern movies, that tends to be what's lacking. It's really the writing. The writing is just not up to snuff. There's been a loss of an ability to tell a great story and to have great actors carry it out for you. I don't know. Every time I see one of these great classics, I'm reminded of like, it's so rare to see films that are that good. But anyway, leave me your thoughts down below. I'd love to read them, and I'll check you all next time. Have a great day. On my Patreon, there is a newish free story that you can read that I wrote live on the air, and I'm going to try to work on getting another one out, as well as I'm still working on the music. So I appreciate everybody's support, and I will see you all next time. Have a great day.